Welcome to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. I am your host, Molly Southgate, and today I'm interviewing
Travis Richey.
Hi there. How are you doing today?
Hi, Molly. I am outstanding. How are you?
I'm doing great. I am so excited to be talking and to talk about your new book.
Thank you.
Can you tell me a little bit about your writing?
Yeah, well, I mean, my writing goes back many, many years. I have been writing most of my life in some way or another. When I moved to LA about 20 years ago, I really had been getting into sketch comedy. And so that's what I gravitated to and got into the comedy scene here. And then I wanted to get into some TV writing and stuff. So I've written a couple pilots. I wrote a movie based on a web series that I did. And then I had this movie idea that I sat on for a number of years. And at some point, it was a vampire story. And I was like, you know what? I mean, Twilight got made into a movie. So why not just write this thing as a book? And, I had a kind of a bad fall where, like, my dog died and my agent died and my boyfriend left and all that stuff. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to write this book. And that was 2014. And I did not write the book, but what I did do was I was just going to vomit it up and, just see what happened because I knew the general story already. But my friend Melinda Snodgrass, who is a wonderful writer, invited me over to her place to break the plot of this book. And I'm like, I don't know what that means. And she's like, oh, just make an outline. And I'm like, great, let's do that. So we did that, and then I had an outline, and it took about, and I pecked away at it for a little bit, and then the pandemic happened. I was in Japan working at Universal. I don't know if I can say that or not, but and I had just kind of gotten into the rhythm of my work, finding an hour a day to write, and then I got sent home early because of the pandemic. And I'm sitting in, not even home. I was staying with a friend in Nashville, Tennessee, doing nothing and feeling very much like I didn't want to waste my time. And I was like, you know what? It's time to finally write this book. So for NaNoWriMo 2020, I put out 60,000 words and finished this book. And I was really happy with how it turned out. Like, I don't know. As far as the writing process goes, all I had was that outline, which was, each kind of chapter almost.
Mm-hmm.
And but I was really surprised by how much the characters said and did that I wasn't expecting, and kind of just how much came out. So yeah, that's the process. A lot of people do a lot more to prep for writing, and I didn't.
That is really cool. I was actually going to ask about NaNoWriMo because for anyone listening to this, I'm sure it'll come out past this, but currently we're in November in NaNoWriMo season.
Yep. Are you doing a book?
Yes, but I was working on it before, and I'm not
okay.
really doing it. I'm doing soft NaNoWriMo this year.
I am not this year. I have stuff to work on, but this year I've just been a little too busy. I am an actor by profession, and so it's been very slow this summer with the actors strike, and so I have been working, so I had to pick up a second job. I am back at work on my main job, doing acting stuff, but so it's just busy. I don't know who has the time to write. That is the big problem with writing, isn't it? The discipline to make yourself sit down and write a couple thousand words a day. That's the hard part.
Absolutely. Do you have anything that you do to kind of have that discipline to remind yourself to write? Do you have any tricks?
I don't. I used to go to a coffee shop. I really do like that coffee shop vibe. And during the pandemic, when I was writing Decimus Book 1, I went to a YouTube channel that was basically an hour of coffee shop ambience.
Oh, that's fantastic.
You can find these YouTube videos, and they're fantastic. And so I went to that, and I would use that to write.
That is really cool.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned your friend was the one that suggested making the outline together, but is that something that you usually do as a writer or that you'd find yourself doing again?
I am a hugely collaborative writer. I love working with other people. And so, and I never assume that I'm the best idea in the room. So what I love to do is getting other people's opinions on story ideas, on outlines. Like so far with the Decimus sequel, I've talked to, I think, two people, and I have at least one or two more that I want to work with on the outline itself before I even start writing the book. So yeah, I love that process. And then once I've written the book, I send it to as many people who will read it and give me feedback before I even send it to my editor. So.
That is really interesting. Yeah. So kind of leads me into my next question, which was going to be, what are some of the main differences between writing TV and film and working on novels for you? I mean, you usually assume TV and film is a lot more collaborative than prose writing.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I get that collaborative work ethic from writing sketch comedy, because when I was at the Acme Comedy Theater, we were writers and actors. So you weren't allowed to just do one or the other. And you were often writing with a partner when you were writing sketches. So that collaborative feeling is just infuses itself into everything I do. And the difference is that, well, when writing sketch or TV even, you're mostly thinking about dialogue. And you really are trained to minimize the rest of it, because as a writer, they say, well, the decision on what things look like is kind of the director's thing. And so you don't want to step on people's feet. But as an author, you have to create the entire universe. So not only what the characters are seeing and hearing, but also what they're thinking, smelling, tasting, touching. And that was a really big change for me. So for this book, actually, The Vampire's Curse, I wrote the first chapter. The first pass was just dialogue. I just did the scene because I knew it was a scene between two people. And so I just did the dialogue pass. And then I went back and focused on the five senses. Like, what are they seeing and hearing and feeling? So that was a really big change for me.
That is so cool. Yeah, I've heard stories before of people that did work in that script writing space doing things like that when they made the transition, like sort of easing in by working on the dialogue. And I think that's a very interesting method that more prose writers should adopt, for sure.
Yeah, there's also a difference in that scripts are all written in present tense and books are usually written in past tense. So that was another big thing where I was constantly finding myself doing the wrong tenses when I was writing. So took a little bit used to.
Yes, as someone who went from prose to script writing, I had the exact opposite problem.
Yeah.
So you've mentioned a little bit about your book. Can you give just quick plot description, hopefully spoiler free for anyone listening?
Yeah, Decimus, The Vampire's Curse is I guess it's called Decimus Book 1, The Vampire's Curse, or something. It's how I describe it is a gay vampire thriller love story. And
it sounds perfect also, just from that description. I will have you know.
Thank you. It is not a capital R romance novel, right? His throbbing member, pushed into, it's not, there's nothing quivering, no quivering body parts in the book, but there is a lot of sexiness and some kind of what I say is realistic depictions of sex. And so just a fair warning. But essentially, it's a love story. I wanted to have a character who the number 10 is what Decimus means, right? Decimus is 10. And so the number 10 worked its way a lot into the story. And it started with my understanding early on in my life that, the number of gay people in society is about 1 in 10, right? And so I thought, what if you're a vampire who is rare, and then you're also gay, and that's rare? How do you find love? And the twist on the vampire mythology that I added to the story, which I think is the most cool thing about it, is that in my vampire world, when a vampire turns a human, it happens the same way it happens in True Blood or, Anne Rice novels or whatever. You drain a human of their blood, give them some vampire blood, and they're a vampire. But in my world, it only works about 1 in 10 times. The other 90% of the time, the human dies, right? So you can't really turn a human at will. So what happens if you're a vampire and you fall in love with a human? Well, then what do you do? And that's where the drama comes in. So you basically have three choices. You leave them, right? You don't let yourself be in a relationship. You stay with them and then watch them grow old and die, or you try to turn them and most likely kill them in the hopes that you can be together forever. So, yeah, that's where the real drama comes in this book, and I love that. There's also a villain character and some really great ancillary characters that are related to the protagonist, Joseph, and then he does meet his guy. Joseph meets David, and they fall in love. So, and then they have to deal with that conundrum.
That is so cool. Yeah, one of something that I find so fascinating about vampires and vampire fiction is always what people choose to leave in and what people choose
Mm-hmm.
to take away. Because
Yeah,
most of the time they don't keep in everything that is like in Dracula or whatever. We've gotten
right.
very far from the lizard vampires, and people don't go with entirely with what Twilight says or what some of these pillars of vampire fiction do. And I love that. I love that twist so much because it adds so much pathos into a story.
Yeah, I tried to keep my vampires very realistic, for want of a better word. I rooted them in real biology, so they don't do anything supernatural. They don't fly. They don't transmogrify into anything. They don't. They have reflections. The crosses don't do anything to them. That kind of thing. But you can
Mm.
still have an aversion to garlic. You can still have a super sensitivity to sunlight. You can still have all these things that I think are very important to vampire mythology and lore, and kind of this modern vampire that we've created. Very recently, by the way, I took a class about vampires also during the pandemic, and it was fascinating to see where the mythology originates in like Slovakian culture and in Eastern European culture.
Oh yeah, there's so much interesting history behind where all of that the vast mythos comes from, and where a lot of these things, like you said, it is so recent. So much of
Mm-hmm.
the things that we associate with vampires are a lot more modern.
Yeah. Absolutely. Dracula was a huge change, and that was just the beginning of the 1900s that book came out. So,
For sure.
yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about that world building process also?
For me, so the interesting thing about Decimus that I mentioned is that it lived in my head for a very long time. It was 2009 when I originally came up with the idea as a movie, and that 1 in 10 thing was the core of it, right? And I
Mhm.
remember I recently, like, after writing the book and everything, I was looking for a file on my computer, and it brought up a completely unrelated file to what I was searching for, but it happened to be a half a page scene that I'd written for this vampire idea. There were no character names. It was just a little bit of dialogue, but it dates back to 2019 or 2009. And so the building of that world was just percolating in my head the whole time. And you grasp things from other things that you love, right? I definitely have other vampire stories that are influencing me. The idea of a very long-lived character kind of living on his own,
Mhm.
that's a lot of Highlander in there, so you'll definitely get glimpses of that kind of feel. And as it went, it just and this book is lucky enough to be placed in Los Angeles, where I live. So as far as the world building goes, it's my world, and I'm just putting characters in it, right? And then it's just about building the characters and making them as real as possible, giving them emotions and desires and passions of their own.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So you've shared with me some of this writing process and like the path to getting the book written, but I'm also very curious about what your path to publication looked like. I know it's really
Yeah.
important, especially for people starting out trying to figure out how to get books published, to hear
Mhm.
from authors like yourself.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I had given a lot of thought into self-publishing early on, because I have a friend who is a self-published author, and she's doing fantastic now. And I saw her get so much success from that. And also recently, she started maybe 10 years ago. So I had been thinking, oh, maybe the moment has passed. But then I have another friend who started self-publishing over the pandemic, and he's doing extraordinarily well. So that's an option, right? I happen to be very bad at the promotion of creation, right? I love creating, and if you look at things like my YouTube channel, you'll see that I have web series and hundreds of videos and sketches and all these things, and so I'm very good at making the thing, but bad at like following up with that. Like, what's the next step? So
yeah, I
fortunately,
100% get that.
yeah, it's hard to be good at everything, or even adequate at everything. Competent, I guess, is even a better word. Like, it's hard to be competent at everything
it's
you
like the
need
creative
to do.
dilemma. Also, you want to create a million things, but then you're not quite
Yes,
sure how to make all of them into what you want,
right,
or
exactly.
and
Yeah,
you've
well,
already
and
moved
I've come to
on.
that. Yeah, and so that was the nice thing about being in YouTube, was that I could often have an idea and make it a reality and publish it within a week, right? And then I had this web series that got a lot of attention, and we tried to make a movie out of it, and suddenly it's a much bigger project, and I wasn't able to do it because it so much more depends on its success. But that's getting off the rails. The Fortunately, I had become friends. So we talked a little bit before we started recording. I was on TV. I was on a TV show called Community, and I played Inspector Spacetime on Community. Because of that, I was fortunate enough to get some attention with convention appearances, and like I had a year of going around and doing conventions, which was so much fun. But at one of the conventions, I happened to meet a writer by the name of Melinda Snodgrass, who wrote on Star Trek: The Next Generation. And not just wrote on Star Trek, but wrote one of the best episodes of Next Generation. It's always in top 10 lists, called Measure of a Man. And so, of course, I wanted to talk to her, and she took a liking to me, and we became friends, and we were going to dinners and stuff back in LA. And so when the time came for me to break the plot, she was the one I turned to, right? And she helped me develop the story a little bit. And
Absolutely,
then,
yeah.
yeah, when I finished it, she was the person I sent it to and said, "Hey, this is the book. What do you think?" And she referred me to her publisher at the time, who put it out, but then there was some problems with that publisher, and so luckily, I'd because of that, I had found Four Horsemen, who said we would love this series. So they're the ones that just put it out. So it was a very fortunate, serendipitous process for me.
That is incredible. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, all right.
Yeah.
So you're mentioning your work as an actor, work on Community, on your web series and everything. Has that influenced your writing in any way?
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, it's not just the writing, but also the mentality of writing. So there's a couple of phrases that I live by, and one of them that I love and I tell everybody is that don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Right?
Mhm.
If you wait until you can do something perfectly the way your mind envisions it in its best form, you'll be waiting forever and you'll never actually do it. But in the meantime, you could have done 10 good things just by doing it. And so like I'm very much into that mindset. So that also goes into my writing, where like I don't think this book is perfect, but I think it's pretty good, and I really enjoy it. Like I enjoy reading it, which is always kind of the bar that you put, give yourself. Like, do
Mm.
I enjoy experiencing this thing that I made? And fortunately, in this case, I do. And so I think that is probably one of the biggest influences. Also, dialogue is a strength of mine. People keep telling me that the dialogue in the book is one of the best parts. It's natural, it's real, and that might be because I'm acting it out as I'm like the characters are speaking in my head, and I'm hearing them and directing them almost
Mm.
while I'm writing. So that probably helps.
That is really interesting to hear that you're like almost in a director position. Because I have a lot of authors on the show who tell me that they have the characters kind of speaking to them and through them, and they're like, I'm just writing it all out. But do you have a little bit more control over it almost?
A little bit, but there is also that that improv nature of it, where so when I do improv, my training is in long form improv, where you are basically creating a character and then you're going into a scene and letting that character talk. And oftentimes I'll get off of stage and somebody will be like, "That's the funniest thing you've heard," and I'll be like, "I don't remember what I said," because it's so in the moment. So that is also happening in your brain, where each character is saying something and the next character has to respond to that thing while also thinking their thoughts. And so I would say, now that I'm saying that, the directing aspect of it is less prevalent than the same thing that you say other people talk about, where you're not a bystander, but you are you're kind of like I don't know, you're almost a third character, but who has you're transcribing the conversations and the what you're seeing, but you do have some influence, right? If you want something to happen, you can make it happen.
Absolutely. Have you ever had a moment when you were writing where it was like you had to your characters completely got away from you? They went in a totally different direction.
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely. And in this book, there was a thing that happened, and it surprised me, and it changed the plot. Not drastically, but I had to go back and fix things. I had to be like, I this was surprising, and so I can't believe that they said that, but it was true, right? It was true to the character, and so it became the truth for that character.
Yeah.
And then you just have to mold your story around it.
Are you able to share what that moment was? Or would it be too big of a spoiler?
Yeah, it's a pretty big spoiler, so I don't want to. Yeah, but it's a pretty big event. People have told me that it's one of the surprising things.
Oh, all right, interesting. Well, I'll have to read it and then see if I can figure out what moment that was.
Yes.
So you mentioned earlier that you've sort of always been writing. When you were a kid, were you also interested in it, or did that come later?
Well, let's see. When did I really, really start writing? I think probably I've always told stories. Like, I remember I was a big reader as a child, and my best friend and I used to make up worlds and play in these worlds, and they were often mashups of the books that we loved, right? And so they involved having a magic ring that gave us the ability to talk with dolphins, and whatever. And so I feel like that storytelling dates back to my early childhood. And as far as writing goes, I feel like I was writing stories in high school. I also wrote my first TV scripts in high school. I remember that Star Trek, to bring that back, was one of the only series that allowed submissions of scripts.
Oh yeah.
And you could actually obtain a release and send them your script, and sometimes they would actually hire that person or bring them on to the writing team. And so I wrote 2 scripts for Star Trek Voyager, and had very strong opinions on how that show should go. And even now, I'm like, oh man, they missed opportunities on that show by making it kind of safe. But so I wrote my first 2 episodes of TV back in high school.
Okay, wait, would you share what your episodes were about?
Oh yeah, well, one of them was a time travel episode, because I love time travel and I love seeing it done in ways that are unusual. So in this episode, it was essentially an It's a Wonderful Life, basically, for Captain Janeway, where she's kind of feeling bad about the state of the crew and being so far away from home, and like she's like, well, maybe they'd be better off without me. And then she starts zapping around in time a little bit. And there's one scene where, and I love this idea, and I think maybe we've finally seen it in something, but they're all on the bridge, and all of a sudden this other Captain Janeway appears on the bridge, and she's like, oh yeah, she's right, this is only about a minute ago. And so they have this conversation for a minute, and then our Captain Janeway goes back in time a minute, And so now she's the second Janeway who appeared on the bridge, and she's like, "Oh yeah, this was about a minute ago." And then, of course, the Janeway who was there disappears to go back a minute, and now she's a minute out of phase with her time, but she's their Captain Janeway from now on. And it's like those types of mindy things, mind trippy things, are really appeal to me. The end of the episode, well, after the whole thing she ends up going like 20 years in the future and seeing what Voyager would be like without her. And and finds out that of course Voyager would be better off if she'd never left. And it all I think it was ended up being Q at the bottom of it, or possibly Kess I might have brought back. So that was one episode. The other was
fantastic. I totally would have watched that.
I really like it too. And there's another episode which I never I wrote, but I outlined, where it was another time travel episode where like 30 different Tom Paris's come back in time from different possible futures, and they're all warning Voyager about some horrible thing that's about to happen, the thing that was so bad that it caused them to come back in time to try to prevent it, right? But it's all different things. And so they have to like navigate through all these different timelines and possibilities, avoiding all these horrible things. And one by one, as they eliminate possible futures, the Parises disappear until finally they manage to get rid of all of them. I just loved that concept. And the other one that I actually did write was a very traditional Star Trek, like let's tell a morality tale, something about today's society. And this was basically healthcare. They go to a planet, and two of the crew members get trapped on a planet where they don't practice medicine traditionally. They compassionately euthanize people who are sick or injured in order to strengthen the gene pool. And it's just the way they do things. And so that's our crew has to like survive that society. So because of course one of them is injured. One of them, they crash land on the planet, and one of them gets injured. And it's like, I think Tuvok is going to be killed because he's got a broken arm. And like, I think he's there with Paris, and Paris is like, no, you can't, because he's not one of you. That kind of thing.
Those all sound so cool. I definitely would have watched those episodes.
Thanks.
I love Janeway also. So anything that she's
Janeway is awesome. I didn't love Voyager as a series. I liked it. I thought it was about 50-50 good. I was really big fan of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. I think that is the best Star Trek. But Voyager had a lot going for it. I loved the Doctor. I liked Neelix a lot too as a character. But Janeway was pretty badass.
Yeah, for sure. So was there anything else I had to have a brief Star Trek interlude there, but you were saying that you wrote those scripts when you were in high school. Was there anything beyond that?
Yeah, just short stories, nothing terribly impactful, I don't think. There was a story that I wrote that I really want to come back to, and I remember the seed of it. Like, I was reading an Omni magazine, I think, when that existed, or some sort of science magazine, because I was a giant nerd even then. And I read Discovery or Discover magazine and Omni magazine obsessively. And there was a article about scientists think they could recreate the Big Bang inside of a black hole. And I was like, oh, sure, what could go wrong? And of course, the story sprang from that. And it's about a scientist who, in order to study the origins of the universe, recreates the Big Bang inside of a black hole, and it escapes. And so then what happens? So that's that. I really would love to get back to that. I think there's a series in there, because eventually what happens is this universe expands, and everybody in the universe is trying to run away from it, but eventually it catches up with them, and you have to turn your ship around and go back and go into this newly created universe. And like physics are different, and what is different inside this new universe, and so I don't know.
That's really
I feel
cool.
like there's meat there if I need to come up with another book series down the line.
I think that's one of the best parts about having short stories to look back on, though, is you can see it. It's like, you know what? I totally see the vision for this. I don't have to go to it yet, but I can down the line.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Because I've seen that story recently, and it's not great because it's a high school, story. But the 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 I guess the story, the writing isn't great, but the story is there, and I'm like, oh, I could do this much better now, I think.
The story is really, really, really intriguing. Well, if you do have that written, feel free to come on the show. I would love to talk with you about it.
All right, yeah, I've got a lot on my plate. That one's be several years down the road if ever.
Well, honestly, I think that was all of the questions I have for you, but thank you so much for coming on today.
Well, my pleasure. It was wonderful to talk to you.
I just have one more, and that's what do you have coming up?
Oh gosh, so much. Well, so you mentioned that you were a community fan
Oh, yes.
before we started, and the next book that is currently into the editor is the novelization of the Inspector Chronicles movie that we tried to make. So we did the Inspector Chronicles, or we couldn't call it Inspector Spacetime because we were making it ourselves. So we called it Untitled Web Series about a space traveler who can also travel through time. And then, but if you look for Inspector Spacetime web series, that's what comes up. And it's pretty good. It got us a lot of attention. So we tried to make a movie, basically version of it, and couldn't get it made. And so now what I've decided to do, now that I have a publisher, I'm like, how would you like the novelization of that? And they're like, yeah. So that's the next one to come. And both of these books now are going to be series. So I'll have a Decimus series, which I'm outlining the sequel to right now. And then the Inspector Chronicles series is going to be concurrent to that.
That is incredible. I cannot wait to read all of these books. I hope that anyone listening to this will buy these and support this incredible author. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you again for coming on today. I had a really great
Oh,
time talking with you.
my pleasure. Thanks you. And like, if you do want to see more of me, my comedy is all on YouTube at the Travis Richey channel. So easy to find. And hopefully there's something there that you'll like. Check the playlists, I think, is the way to go, because you'll find my first series was a sitcom called Robot Ninja and Gay Guy, which I'd also love to get back to. It's just a roommate
That
sitcom.
has an amazing name. I'm already in.
Exactly. Everyone says that. I'm like, why not? It's so good. And then the Inspector Chronicles series, and then a bunch of other stuff. Two Hot Guys in the Shower is one of the series I did. It was an advice show with me giving advice to people in the shower. So it's all there. That's good stuff.
That is awesome. Well, for Read Between the Lines, my name is Molly Southgate.
And I'm Travis Richey.
Let's end this the way all great stories end. Happily ever after. The
end.
Thank you for listening to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. You can follow the show on Instagram and Facebook at Read Between the Lines Podcast and on Twitter at RBTL Podcast. Make sure to follow the authors who I've been talking to hear all about their upcoming projects, and also because they're cool people. This show is hosted by me, Molly Southgate, and produced and edited by my dad, Rob Southgate. Read Between the Lines is a Southgate Media Group production, and you can find all the great content put on by the network at southgatemediagroup.com. You can read the story of how I and many other podcasters started in the anthology book Pod Life, which you'll find at the link in the show notes. Also in the show notes are links to buy the books featured on this episode. Using those links supports this show and the incredible authors being interviewed. Have a great week and keep reading.